Good morning. Thank you. I'm not typically a morning person, so I appreciate the callback. Welcome to day 2 of Global Plant Forward Culinary Summit. So now it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Abby Fammartino, who is Director of Health and Sustainability Programs for the Strategic Initiatives Group, and she will introduce this session.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm thrilled to be here introducing our first session of the day, which is a window into the delicious, innovative, and unstoppable force that is vegan cuisine. In recent years, vegan cooking has been more widely embraced by the general public, largely due to chefs, like those we'll hear from shortly, who dedicate their creativity and passion to producing flavorful and highly craveable food, working within the parameters of non-dairy and non-meat ingredients. And fortunately, there are way more non-dairy and non-meat ingredients, things that happen to be vegan than not. The range of vegan options can be endless, limited only by the imagination and technical ability of chefs. I'm personally passionate about this subject. I actually started my career as a health supportive chef, cooking largely vegan, and I appreciate that today the average eater is more open to trying vegan food, and I think this is perhaps due to a few concurrent trends happening. First, as you'll soon see, vegan cuisine is so well presented, so well delicious that people are just trying it. They're craving it. It just happens to be vegan. In other cases, people are trying to minimize their dietary carbon footprint, so reducing meat and dairy. They may be looking to improve their health, so lowering their meat and dairy intake as part of a plant-forward or flexitarian diet, so just eating a little bit less. Either way, we're fortunate to have a number of delicious vegan options on menus across the country. And now, without further ado, I will introduce our 2 amazing chefs who are going to be giving us a window into the world of vegan cooking with some culinary demonstrations. First, I'd like to introduce Priyanka Naik, an award-winning Indian vegan chef who lives in New York City. Priyanka is a Food Network champion, a TV host, a journalist, a pop-up restaurateur, a brand ambassador, an author of the Modern Tiffin Cookbook, which I really enjoy. I have a bookshelf on my home. So please join me in welcoming Priyanka. And next, I'd like to welcome Kate Lasky, who's the co-owner and co-chef of Apteka, which is an innovative Central and Eastern European restaurant in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It features an entirely from-scratch vegan menu, and I can't wait to eat there next time I visit my extended family in Pittsburgh. Kate and her partner, Tomas, have been recognized as James Beard Award finalists in 2023, and were listed in the New York Times list of favorite restaurants in 2022. Please join me in welcoming Kate. Okay, I'm going to now pass it off to Priyanka to begin her demo.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you all for coming out so early. It's technically midday for me because I'm on New York time, so I'm ready for lunch, which makes this dish absolutely perfect. But it's very nice to meet you all. I'm Priyanka. I'm going to be making a dish from my book, The Modern Tiffin. It's going to be the spinach walnut stuffed eggplant rolls. I love this dish, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit before we get started because eggplant are one of those vegetables that are either loved or hated, and most of the time, unfortunately, I find that people hate it, and that makes me really sad because as an Indian person, we grew up on eggplant. We ate eggplant in so many different variations, baby eggplants, Italian eggplant, Japanese eggplant, and I truly believe that people just don't maybe know how to cook it properly, so then they don't like it and it feels rough on the tongue. So I'm going to be sharing this dish, which has a few elements of my background, which of course I'm Indian, but then also some Mediterranean and Middle Eastern elements. You'll notice that my cooking style is a culmination of cuisines from around the world. I think food is one of the few and best connectors of cultures around the world, and I approach food like a blank canvas. So it's not just Indian, it's not just Middle Eastern, it's sort of a combination. So first we're gonna get started on the sauce for our dish. I like to do that first because I want it to kind of sit and marinate and really develop all those flavors while we're preparing everything else. So it's gonna be very herby, similar to kind of a chimichurri. So we're gonna add some fresh parsley. This is flat leaf parsley. I'm actually not the biggest fan of parsley, but I find that in a dish like this, it's very vibrant and flavorful and doesn't overpower the other ingredients. Then we're using some fresh mint. Again, another very sweet and herby herb. And we actually, yes, it's used a lot in Middle Eastern cuisine, but it's also used a lot in Indian cuisine. We make chutneys with mint. We use it as a garnish. We actually don't use it in desserts as much. It's used mostly in savory cooking. So we're gonna add some fresh mint. Then we're gonna add a little bit of black pepper and some salt. You always need to salt all components of your food. This is a flavor enhancer, not a seasoning in my kitchen. And we're gonna add some dry red chilies. This is the Indian component to this dish. We cook with a lot of different types of chilies. Even though chilies are not indigenous to India, they're actually from South America. They're probably the most widely used in India. So these are just dried cayenne chilies. They add a lot of spice. I'm gonna add 2 because I like it spicy, but 1 is probably enough for most. Thank you. And a little bit of lemon juice because we need a little bit of acid to balance out the spice and the herbiness. And then we're gonna start pulsing this, and while it's pulsing, we're gonna drizzle in some extra virgin olive oil. Okay. And we want to make sure to use a very good quality olive oil because this is a raw component to the dish. So the olive oil flavor is really going to come through. So you don't want to use anything that's been sitting on your kitchen stove or counter too long or was sitting next to heat too long. It has to be very good quality. So I'm just going to slowly drizzle that in. Okay, perfect. So you'll notice that this is not necessarily completely blended down because we don't want to make a pesto. We kind of want it to remain a little bit chunky, again, similar to a chimichurri because I wanted to add a lot of nice texture to this dish. This is a gigantic spatula. This is huge. Okay, so just a couple more pulses. Great, okay. So now I'm going to transfer this to a bowl. And actually, while it's sitting in the bowl, I'm going to add a little bit more olive oil so it kind of just marinates in there. Thank you so much. I'm going to take my gigantic spatula again, add it to the bowl. Okay. And it's a beautiful green, herby. It has a little bit of spice. It's perfect. And I actually love this dish because almost every component of the dish can be made ahead of time. So when it comes time to serving, you can just basically put everything together. So it makes it very, very easy from an operational standpoint. So this is our sauce. We're gonna set that aside. And next we're gonna tend to our eggplants. So for this dish, we generally like to use an Italian eggplant or anything that has a little bit more size and girth because we're gonna cook it down and stuff it. So you don't wanna use a baby eggplant or a Japanese eggplant that might be too thin because that might be difficult to roll. So what I like to do is I like to cut off the tops. And we just wanna make sure to please try and compost everything. I have to mention that as someone who's just obsessed with cooking low waste. And then we're gonna just make a little kind of flat area here to help stabilize the eggplant. And then we're gonna just make thin, long slices. You don't want these to be too thick because we're gonna end up rolling it. So it's kind of like an appetizer or hors d'oeuvre. So if it's too thick, it might emulate more of a rollatini and we're going for more of an hors d'oeuvre. So just cut some thin slices here. And then the key to this dish, after we cut the eggplant, is salting it. So I think that's the component that people may forget to do or not be aware about in eggplant, is that it could be very, very bitter. And in order to release that bitterness and make it a little bit more palatable and not rough on the tongue, I don't know if there's a technical term for that, but it's just, I call it rough on the tongue. You want to make sure to salt it to release all of that bitterness and moisture. So we're going to take a hefty pinch of kosher salt, and we're going to salt both sides. And you'll notice that once you salt it and you let it sit, all of this sort of like brown color moisture from the eggplant is going to release. So we're going to let that sit on the side. Thank you. And we actually have some that we've already salted because we have TV magic here at the Culinary Institute. And once they're salted and all of that moisture is drained, you just want to rinse it so that you release or you rinse off all of that salt, because you don't want to necessarily take that salty eggplant and put it directly in the pan because the bite might be a bit too salty. So once you've rinsed it and you pat dried it really well, and you kind of see it's much more soft and wiggly than it was before, it's almost like it's half cooked at this point, we just want to heat a skillet, and we're going to sear these until they're fork tender. And what's great about this dish too, besides being able to actually prepare all the components ahead of time, it's actually a one-pan dish. So you'll notice that I'll prepare the eggplants in here, and then I'll also prepare the filling in here. So it's very easy. We're going to take a neutral oil. You want to make sure to use a neutral oil when you're searing these because we're going to be using a medium to high flame. So you want an oil that can withstand a high smoking point. And I love making this dish because this is actually a very atypical way for us to prepare eggplant at home or generally throughout different regional Indian cuisines. Most of the time when we prepare eggplant, it's either stuffed. We take a baby eggplant and we stuff it, and then we simmer it in a very like spicy, earthy gravy. Or we'll take eggplant like this, chop it into cubes, and temper it with a lot of spices. So this concept is sort of deviating from the traditional way of cooking eggplant in India, but then you'll notice that a lot of the Indian spices and elements will be present in the filling because it wouldn't be a Chef Priyanka dish without some sort of spice in there. So once this is hot, we want to get our eggplants in. You want it to be a little bit more hot so you hear that sizzle. We need some ASMR action here, so I gotta wait till it's a little bit more hot. All right, so you add these in, and then we're gonna cook it for about 2 to 3 minutes on each side until they get slightly golden. We don't want them to turn into a mush. We're not making baba ganoush. We are just searing them to make sure that they're cooked and we're able to roll them. And eggplants tend to take and absorb a lot of oil, so you notice that I actually put quite a bit of oil in this pan, and that was purposeful because they do absorb a lot of oil, so I want to make sure they cook evenly and they're sort of bathing in the oil a little bit while cooking. That's why we have sort of a pretty generous amount of neutral oil in the pan. And while these are cooking, I want to talk through a little bit about the spices that I'm using. So this is called masala dabbi. Dabbi means container. Masala is just a catch-all term for spices, essentially. So you will probably see something like this in every Indian household, across many Indian kitchens. Whenever I do pop-ups, I actually bring my own masala dabbi from my house because it is my trusted vessel to carry all of my favorite spices. But the reason why you'll notice that this is used a lot prominently in India and amongst Indian people is that it's a great vessel to not only hold the spices, but it also protects the spices from heat, from light, and also steel is incredibly powerful in holding spices and not retaining the flavor or color of those spices. So it is very easy to clean. One spice that is not present here that obviously I cook with a lot is turmeric. And I will never place turmeric in something that's not steel because it will immediately stain it. But I just wanted to talk through the masala dabbi because this is very precious to me, and I would say most Indian cooks, and I highly, highly recommend storing your spices in something like this. So for this dish, we're actually going to use whole spices. I tend to cook with whole spices a lot, and it's also something that I feel like is not used enough. Whole spices not only tend to be more inexpensive than actual ground up spices, but whole spices retain a lot of natural oils and flavors. So once you grind it down, all of those oils have already been released, which means that their flavors are releasing. So they're not as strong or flavorful than when you use whole spices. So what I like to do is use whole coriander seeds and also whole cumin seeds. And in this dish, you can either use a ground red chili powder. This is fine to use ground or whole because the flavor and texture is actually varying. But for this, I'm gonna put whole red chili because what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the whole spices and grind it down in a mortar and pestle. This is also a very traditional way of grinding spices. I also do this throughout cooking for myself at home. I do this in my pop-ups. I think it's a much better way than blitzing spices in a spice grinder because this retains the integrity more of the spices. And because, as I mentioned, there's so many natural oils in this, it tends to release slowly, so it'll be that much more flavorful. So I'm grinding these down, and we want a coarse grind. And you can make this as fine or chunky as you want. I'm gonna leave it a little bit coarse because I like that flavor in the filling. And before we get this in here, notice, thank you so much, Rebecca. Our eggplants are done. They're nicely golden and fork tender. And in that same pan, we're actually gonna saute our filling. So I'm using the residual oil that we have. We're a no waste life here. And we're gonna actually start by tempering the spices first. This is my weightlifting for the day. We're gonna put in the spices. Another very traditional way of cooking, which I highly recommend people to do because it really releases so much flavor. So many people think that vegan cuisine or vegetables are bland and have no flavor. I obviously disagree with that a lot. We use a ton of whole spices like this, which immediately adds flavor without having to marinate or, sous vide something. Like, you literally have a flavor bomb in your mouth by doing just this. I'm adding some white onion as well, and a little bit of garlic. I added my onion first and then my garlic because we don't want the garlic to burn. So we just want to get these a little bit sweaty, and we want the onions to release their moisture. And notice that it's a fine dice. Everything is finely diced because we're going to be stuffing it into the eggplant and rolling it up. And I'm actually going to add a little bit of salt to help with the moisture release of the onions and a little bit of pepper. But we already have so much flavor with the coriander seed, the cumin seed, and the red chili. It really doesn't need much more. All right, so these are looking great. So I'm going to add in some chopped baby spinach. I love adding spinach to this dish. It's kind of my variation of, we make palak paneer, which is a blended spinach dish, which has a lot of these spices and flavor components. The spinach is also used a lot throughout the Middle East and Mediterranean cooking. So I wanted to, again, combine those flavors together and those concepts in this dish. And you want to make sure to chop the spinach because you want it to be very, very fine for the filling. And spinach, as you know, is quick cooking. So, in 2 minutes, this is going to go from this amount to like 1 tablespoon. But that's why the onion is in there to provide it more body and aromatics and flavor. So while that is cooking down, we're just going to prepare our station here for rolling the eggplants. So we have our beautiful eggplants here. Just going to lay them down. And we also have some of our filling already prepared. What I like to do is prepare the eggplant first, as you see, so it's a little bit cool to touch. And then the filling after that, once it's done, I just let it cool down for a few minutes because you don't want to burn your fingers when rolling. And we're gonna add a little bit of filling here. I'm actually gonna turn this around because I want the little fat side towards me. And add about a teaspoon of filling. And we're gonna roll them up like so. Look how cute. So cute. We're gonna add another teaspoon here. And I'm a little generous with my filling because I want people to eat this and be like, wow, that was an explosion of flavor. Priyanka, you're the best chef I've ever met, you know? So we have them rolled up, and then the way I like to serve it, because I love contrasting colors and colors in general, as you can see, I like to take a pretty neutral plate, and we're gonna add a few of our rolls here. And this could be served cold, room temperature, or warm. I prefer serving this between room temperature and warm because I think the flavors just blend together much more beautifully. And I'm not too big a fan of cold food. And I like to just put these in a row. These two can just hang out here because that might be too much for my plate right now. And then what I like to do is take our sauce, which has been sitting here and marinating, and it's like a very chimichurri-esque texture. And I like to just drizzle that on top. So beautiful. I don't think there's a dish that I make that doesn't have green in it. Like, it's one of my favorite colors. I think the more colorful your dish is, the more nutrient-packed it is, and it's just more pleasing to the eye. I do eat with my eyes first, so as most people do. Just get a little bit of that oil here. And then I like to garnish it with some sliced scallions for a little bit of that fresh element. And a little bit of walnuts. These are lightly toasted, chopped, unsalted walnuts to sort of, again, round out that sort of Middle Eastern flair. It also adds a little bit of protein to the dish. I'm always thinking about nutrients in everything that I cook. And I also absolutely love the texture on this. If you notice that there's a lot of varying textures in this dish, you'll never see me make a dish that's sort of monotonous and one texture or one flavor. So I think it's really important for someone to take a bite of this and really get the soft eggplant and soft spicy filling, as well as the crunch of the walnut and then the freshness of the scallion. So it's kind of very punchy and flavorful all in one bite. So these are my spinach walnut stuffed eggplant rolls, and they're actually in my book, The Modern Tiffin, which some shameless self-promotion. I will be doing a signing after this at 10:30. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. We have just time for like a quick question. I was hoping to that you could provide us some tips for people who are looking to incorporate more vegan or plant-based cooking, even if they're not cooking vegan exclusively.
Sure, yeah. So I think the one thing that has been very helpful to me and just very present in my life, given that I do come from an Indian background, is that our perspective on a plate of food is very different than I would say the Western perspective. We eat family style, and I think once someone thinks about their plate of food differently, not necessarily like a 3-segmented plate where I need a protein at the center and a carb on the side and a vegetable on the side, and if you sort of dismantle that approach, then your whole horizon for food options and food variations opens. So if you think about your plate of food as more family style, then you have the opportunity to eat multiple dishes. You have the opportunity to eat foods of various textures and flavors, but then all combined on one plate once you serve yourself. I also think making the vegetable the star of the plate versus the non-veg protein is also incredibly important. Again, like growing up vegetarian/vegan, most of our food was vegan by default, but we didn't call it vegan, we just called it food. And there was never a morsel of meat present on the table. And so I think if you think about the eggplant or the cauliflower, the spinach as the actual main component of the dish, then the way you think about that plate of food again completely changes, and it also challenges yourself to cook that vegetable as the main character versus the supporting character. And then the last thing which I mentioned is thinking about the texture and color on your plate. If you notice on this dish, which was extremely simple to make, it has so much flavor, there's varying textures, there's varying colors, and to me that's a complete plate of food versus just eating something that's all red or all beige. So I think thinking about visually how your plate looks and feels is incredibly important as well.
Great, thank you so much, Priyanka. And now I would like to welcome Kate to the stage.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming out to this. Yeah, my name's Kate. I have a restaurant in Pittsburgh, everybody's favorite city. And we are a Slavic restaurant. What we're doing at Apteka is we are documenting, highlighting, and also expanding upon Slavic food, particularly Polish food, because my partner is first generation Polish. We're also translating Slavic food through the vegan lens. So everything at the restaurant's vegan. We've been vegan for a really long time, so that's just kind of like how we see the world and how we eat. So whenever we travel to Poland and kind of that region, and like that's the food we're eating, that's what we're thinking about. So the beautiful thing about Slavic food is, although it's known for meat, I think a lot of people kind of understand Polish food as kind of like a meat-centric cuisine. There's just like a great breadth of vegetables, grains, fruits that are actually like really incorporated in food, especially whenever you're actually in the region. In Pittsburgh, we have a very large, just a long history of Slavic immigration. A lot of last names, including mine, end in ski. I think that just gets people really excited about like having a place that is Polish. But what is kind of missing through a couple generations being in Pittsburgh is that people don't really have that like strong connection to like, these are kind of elements of the cuisine that are maybe missing. These are fruits, these are fermentations, these are all these things that are really quintessential to Slavic food, but maybe aren't showing up in kind of like delis around the city. What we do at the restaurant too is we do a lot of flavor building to kind of like highlight what we see as like what is Slavic food, which a big part of that is, I think, sweet and sour kind of defines a lot of kind of the idea behind the cooking. A lot of that's fruit-based, and a lot of that is fermentation-based. And then it's kind of like backed up with like smoking, preservation. There's two kinds of pickles. One's like a fermented pickle, one's a marinated pickle, that sort of thing. So we do a lot of that kind of stuff at the restaurant, which is to say whenever I was picking a dish, I kind of picked a dish everyone's gonna know, which is gołąbki, stuffed cabbage. And it's kind of pulling from a lot of these techniques while still being kind of like, this is what we know to be Polish food. At the restaurant, we do a lot of different stuffed cabbages through the seasons. This is one that is kind of based on just a flavor combination that we really loved, which is roast cabbage with tomatoes. We usually serve this one kind of towards the end of the summer whenever certain produce is kind of on its way in, certain produce is on its way out. We also, this is gołąbki. It translates to like little pigeons. We have another thing on the menu right now. We have another like gołąbki on the menu we're calling it stado gołębi, which is a flock of pigeons. So they're just like these little cute rolled ones. So there's like a lot of opportunity in this world. What's also cool about this is that my partner, whenever he went vegetarian, his grandmother in Poland was still alive, and she actually kind of started to make stuffed cabbage vegetarian for him, and she made it with mushrooms and buckwheat, which is what we're doing today. So getting into the food portion of this, again, the flavor backbone, we're doing some fermented stuff. What we kind of use right now is we're gonna ferment some turnips for this to give kind of a funky sour element to the dish. So a week in advance, we shred hack-dried turnips just on a coarse side of a box grater. Cover that with 2% salt, kind of knead it in to release some of the water content of that, and then pack it in a non-reactive container and let that ferment for about a week, or until it gets kind of like the sour bite that you're looking for. So this is already done ahead of time. And then a little bit ahead of making the dish, but not a week in advance, then we kind of do some smoking. That's gonna be some of the flavor backbone to this dish. We smoke onions, which are gonna be for the sauce. And then we also smoke a poblano pepper, which is gonna go in the filling. I think smoked vegetables are so delicious, and each vegetable kind of like holds smoke in a different way and can kind of provide different sweetness or just different elements to the dish. So we kind of have, always at the restaurant, we have lots of smoked vegetables on site that we can kind of pull from. So first I'll talk about the sauce. I'm not gonna make it, but I can kind of walk you through what it's like. It's a tomato sauce. First thing we do is we're gonna heat a neutral oil and bloom out some spices and the smoked onion in that, as well as just some plain onion. So we really want to bring those spices alive in the oil. I use cumin, allspice, lots and lots of black pepper, some white pepper, just to kind of like pull in some ingredients into that and kind of give it like, just have this oil that's really aromatized and it's gonna kind of carry through the whole dish. Also in that, we're gonna have some fresh bay leaf as well as some dried mushroom. We pick a lot of mushrooms in Pennsylvania. I usually use dried porcini for this, but really like any kind of like a big aromatic mushroom is going to be perfect for it. When all of that is really kind of alive in the oil, when the onions, the smoked and the raw onions are cooked through, then that's when you're going to flood the pot with your tomato and let that simmer for about, and add your dried mushroom. And then that's gonna simmer for like an hour. You kind of really want it to cook all those flavors to marry together, and then let it sit for a moment, strain it. You can save the guts for like another dish, or you can incorporate them into another filling that can be actually really delicious. But usually like for this dish, then we're looking for like a nice smooth sauce. So this is already put aside. Then the second step is going to be preparing your cabbage. So I like to use Savoy most often for stuffed cabbage because the leaves are really tender, they roll really well, and it's really pretty. So this one I have a Savoy cabbage. What we do is, usually there's a pot of boiling water ready to go, and we're just gonna pour this cabbage, and you're kind of treating it like in a couple different ways. You wanna make sure that you're not cutting through the leaves whenever you're pouring the cabbage, and then you just pull off any of the easy leaves you can just get off without tearing them. And we'll blanch those separately in salted water for about like 45 seconds to a minute until they're really tender and pliable. And then anything that you're not easily pulling off the core, just throw the whole head in the water and you can kind of pull off leaves as you go, until you get to the part of the core where the leaves are gonna be too small for really rolling a guanqui, unless you're doing a flock of little pigeons, which is gonna be so cute. Just something to consider. And then as soon as I have this, then this, I'm not gonna throw this away. This is like so delicious, and it's really just gonna enhance that cabbage flavor that we're really going for. So we just kind of like cut this down and we'll save it for the filling, and you're just doing a really fine julienne and putting that aside so that you have this to work with for your filling. Thank you. So at this point, you have your sauce kind of cooking, you have your cabbage that's been blanched, and this is kind of the state that you're getting it to. So it's like a very pliable cabbage leaf that you've blanched in salted water, so it already has some nice flavor. And we're just gonna cut the rib off of all the cabbage so it's a little bit easier to roll. So we just get in there with a paring knife and gently remove the rib from that. We're gonna do this on another one.
Kate, does the leaf have to be perfect? Like, can it have little holes in it? And
I think it's better, so this is going to be harder to roll, for sure, and you're gonna have to kind of sacrifice the amount of filling that you're putting into this one. You can definitely use this. Sometimes if we end up with like a lot of leaves in the restaurant that we can't use, then we'll just process them down, saute them, and actually throw them in the filling. So definitely don't get rid of them, but just know like this is gonna be a pain. This one's a little bit easier, and the more of the leaf that is intact is going to be a lot easier for you to work with. I will keep those here for rolling the filling. So now, yeah, cabbage is prepped. We have our sauce going, and we're kind of moving on to filling. Thank you. So for the filling, the base of it's really, or the idea behind it is buckwheat and mushroom. For mushrooms, then we kind of like look at whatever we have that we can pick, and whenever we can't pick anything, then we'll kind of resort to using button mushrooms. But a favorite of ours, and when we really started making this particular set, is it was chanterelle season, and we go and we pick tons of chanterelles, and they're nice because they actually store really well. If you kind of like flash fry them and vacuum seal them, then they are like ready in the freezer for especially like a dish like this where you can kind of put all of your ugly chanterelles aside and then have them for crumbling up into a filling. So the things that we already kind of took care of are the simple ones, which is cooking buckwheat. In the United States, a lot of the buckwheat that's grown is grown for flour and for feed. So we always get a Central European buckwheat. I prefer Ukrainian buckwheat, and that's what we use here. And it kind of cooks better into like full textural growths rather than kind of like something that's really not designed for this kind of eating. So this is already ready to go, our buckwheat. We have the cabbage cores that we kind of like put aside, and fermented turnip. Well, I forgot to mention that whenever we do the sauce, we're actually going to take this fermented turnip, strain it off, and then that liquid we're going to save. If you come to the restaurant, you're like 100% going to eat some pickle juice. The liquid is going to be a souring agent in our tomato sauce, and then the solids are nice and sour, and that's going to be kind of like just a flavor that goes into the filling, and it's going to be kind of this sweet and sour element within that. So I have, cabbage. We have these beautiful cabbage cores. We have our strained turnip, and then we have these mushrooms. And I think like as far, with vegan food, like I think one thing that I see regularly is people just not taking their vegetables far enough. And we really kind of like torture vegetables at the restaurant because what we're looking for is getting like just big flavor, which is a lot of time just missing in vegan food because people just don't know how to cook vegetables to really pull them in a direction that you might already be using those same techniques with, other products like meat. So these are kind of the starting point that I wanted to show you, which is like the fermented turnip, the mushroom, and the cabbage. And then this is where I'm kind of taking them to whenever I cook them. I have these mushrooms here that I'm making sure that I get a good sear and even some char on them. And it's gonna be really perfect for like, especially this one that's like kind of nice and juicy because like it's gonna maintain a lot of texture, but it's still gonna get a lot of flavor from that outside sear. And then cabbage and turnip, like I'm also getting a little bit of char on it. Like the turnip really, it's fermented, it's not providing any textural aid, it's really just strictly for flavor. So like you can really get some char on it, cook it through, and it's just kind of gonna dissolve into the filling. The cabbage though is going to kind of maintain a little bit of a crunch. So I just make sure, saute it, get a little bit of color, and that's us. For the mushrooms, we're also gonna either pulse them in a food processor or just chop them down. So this is kind of the final stage for the mushroom, which is they've been trimmed, they've been cooked, and then they've been kind of processed down into this little chop thing. Okay, other things that are going into the filling. Sorry, I need a bowl. Okay, we have our cabbage that's cooked. We have our turnip that's cooked. The mushrooms that are chopped down. I do some caramelized onion. You can take them to kind of like golden. You can take them even a little bit farther if you'd like. Parsley. We also add so as far as like that sweet and sour thing that I've been kind of drilling in, for fermented things, I think what you get is you get like some funk. Sometimes when you use something like sauerkraut juice that's been sitting a little bit longer, then it's really gonna provide that pungent acidity that we're looking for. But we also at the restaurant regularly are kind of supplementing with white vinegar because it just gives like a cleaner acid and it also just really enhances the kind of sour notes that we're looking for. So we'll kind of throw in a little bit of acid there. And then our buckwheat. So proportionally, it's like almost like 1 portion buckwheat to 1 portion of all the other vegetables. This is mixing together. And then to kind of hold it together, especially whenever it's baking, Then we grind up flaxseed to make a flax egg, which is basically like you soak flax seeds in water. It kind of gels, and usually they're ground. It gels up, and then that's going to mix and kind of keep this just to a consistency where it's going to hold together a lot more. And especially after it's baked, then you're going to be able to kind of cut through the cabbage, and it's going to hold its form and not just crumble onto the plate and be more of like a stew. Okay, so then we have our trimmed cabbage leaves. We have our filling. You can really see my rolling skills here with this really torn apart leaf. I'll start with that one and see if I can humiliate myself. So this, you're kind of looking like, you want to make sure all the filling is kind of trapped inside of the cabbage leaf. So I usually am doing about like, for kind of like big boy cabbage rolls, then I'm doing about like a 2/3 cup of the filling. And then for smaller ones, you're just gonna wanna do less. So it really depends on your cabbage and what your portion is. For this, we're just kind of rolling up and over, and then tucking the sides as you go. And I think that just like with pierogi has like a lot of different crimping techniques. There's kind of like the basic, simple one. I like this shape more whenever I'm doing kind of this dish, because usually at the restaurant we plate 2 large ones, so it kind of like works. You can just have them on a plate and have them kissing at the end, and it's really sweet. But you can also just roll kind of more in like a long log, and that's like, I think, like pretty common. So again, just throwing some filling here, rolling it up, throwing it on the tray. We're gonna pack these tightly into a baking tray and cover with about 1/3 of the sauce. You want them like 1/3 of the way covered up from the base of the cabbage. So, oh, yeah, cool. And yeah, just putting as many as we can into here. And then these bake at 350 for about 35 to 40 minutes covered. And then we're gonna take the lid off so that they can kind of get a little bit more color on top.
Kate, I have a quick question from
Absolutely.
the audience, which is, do you use raw or roasted buckwheat groats?
We usually use roasted groats.
Okay.
And honestly, like a lot of times if you're buying like Russian or Ukrainian buckwheat, then it actually comes roasted. I really hate to say, but the Polish buckwheat isn't as good. I wish I could, rep a little bit better on that one. But yeah, roasted is for sure going to be your best bet for
Great,
that.
thank you.
Okay, so these go into the oven, for about 40 minutes covered, and then, about like 5 to 10 uncovered. And really what you're looking at here is just making sure that, this is actually a pretty decent example for it, because you want the cabbage like to be tender, so you can kind of like even feel it and just make sure that it actually feels cooked through. Because like with this, you just don't want somebody kind of doing a lot of the work with their knife of cutting through the cabbage. It should be pretty delicate at this stage. I usually let them sit for a couple minutes just so they can kind of firm up, because sometimes they want to fall apart. It depends, like you're gonna see with your rolling abilities how much they stay together. And then just to kind of get a little bit more kind of color onto these, because they look okay, but they could look a little bit better, we're going to actually sear the tops. So I put down some sunflower oil, and I let that heat up, and then we're gonna kind of sear these as we plate. Tomato sauce we're gonna use for plating, and then we're also gonna serve it with like a sour cream. At the restaurant, we make a cultured cashew and almond cream that kind of like holds the place of a sour cream, but it tastes like, it's really delicious on its own, and it kind of like, we don't cook with a lot of like replacements, but sour cream shows up so much in Slavic food that it's nice to have an alternate that is like kind of holds its own, and texturally is really great, and kind of like can be a cream in dishes that we also make from scratch. So that's gonna end up on the plate. We got our oil heating up. And then I'm just kind of taking them one at a time. The hotter the oil it is, the faster these are gonna go, because really this is just like pure vanity purposes. Because we already have a lot of like the flavor that's gonna be added from this. This is already in the dish from whenever we kind of tortured our mushrooms and cabbage. So then, this is like, if it hasn't been sitting too long, then this is just gonna wanna move. You're just gonna have to be careful with that. And then we're just checking the other side. This is gonna splatter. But luckily I have no feeling left in my arms after having a restaurant for 8 years. Cool. And then while these are searing up, we can kind of start plating our sauce. Hold on. Almost good. So going down is a big spoon of sauce, right in the center. Tomato, fermented turnip, mushroom, all these kind of like flavors that we have going on here. And then we'll kind of look for the prettier cabbages here, but that's all you're looking for. It's just like getting a little bit more color. I also am like, a lot of the tomato that was baked on, that's gonna come off in the pan. So you can also just put the tomato at the bottom whenever you bake them off, if you're going to do the searing, so that it doesn't fall off in the pan. It doesn't really matter. It's gonna add a little bit more flavor with the roasting process, but, okay, and then we're putting 2 on the plate. Almost smooching, but this plate isn't gonna be quite as romantic. And then last up is just some of this fermented cream. Ooh, I'll get the edge tucked in. So again, cashew and almond. We just soak nuts and blend them with, hold on. Soak nuts, we blend them with filtered water. We culture them with a non-dairy culture, and we ferment it for about 24 hours. And then you end up with this kind of like really rich cream. It's an absolute pain to make, but I think it actually like just really makes all of our dishes a lot better. There's, I think, better products on the market now, but you know, I've been vegan for like 15 years, so the days of like tofutti and rice milk, like I think just drove me to actually make a lot of this stuff on my own. Stuffed cabbage, tomato, roasty cabbage, mushrooms, cream. We got ourselves a Polish meal.
Great, thank you so much, Kate. And I'm gonna ask one quick question while we're setting up for the next session,
Absolutely.
which is, you know, how are people finding your restaurant? Like what is, in your perspective, what's motivating them to get there to an entirely vegan restaurant in Pittsburgh, no less?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting too, like probably 95% of the people that come to Apteka are normal and like 5% are vegan vegetarian. So I think most of what we're attracting is just people who are interested in eating good food and that are also looking to kind of relate to their heritage or just go out to a place that's doing something different. We kind of present things in a way where it's like, everything's kind of weird at the restaurant. The menu's in Polish, which like nobody speaks. I mean, it has like English subtitles for everybody. And we smoke out the restaurant with spruce branches and the music's weird. So it kind of like sets people up for having something that's going to be a little bit different, and they're maybe a little bit more prepared for that. But really, I think people are just looking to try something new. We're a part of like a world now that's looking for just a little bit more intrigue in their food.
That sounds great. Sounds a wonderful experience. I can't wait to try it. And thank you so much, Kate, and to Priyanka. We get to taste some things for lunch. So both the stuffed cabbage and the eggplant rolls. And just thank you again. I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer.
Thank you.
Come on up.
My name is Magnus Young, and I'm the Chef de Cuisine and Culinary Manager at the Cliff Family Winery and Biscuiteria Food Truck in St. Helena, California. The food truck can be found parked outside the Cliff Family Tasting Room, and we serve a seasonally inspired menu with organic produce from our farm on Owl Mountain. Grilled lamb chops with watermelon molasses, sofrito, and polenta is a delicious dish that balances the richness of grilled lamb with the bright and fruity sweetness of watermelon molasses. Let's start with the watermelon molasses. First, break down a large seedless watermelon into chunks and remove any seeds. Puree the watermelon in a food processor. Strain through a fine mesh sieve over a receptacle and press gently on the solids for maximum extraction. Transfer the watermelon juice to a shallow pot and bring to a simmer over medium heat. Skim the surface and reduce the heat to a low simmer. Reduce the molasses by about 2/3, which takes about 4 hours depending on the pot used. Transfer the molasses into a smaller pot as it will prevent scorching around the sides. Simmer for about 1 more hour. The molasses is done when it has a thick, syrupy consistency and a dark burgundy color. The watermelon molasses has a lot of applications, from barbecue sauce, glazes for proteins, to desserts. Transfer to a sterilized mason jar or airtight container, cool and refrigerate. We're going to use this molasses to make our watermelon glaze. Mix all glaze ingredients together in a small bowl. Watermelon molasses, Dijon mustard, finely minced fresh thyme, garlic cloves, grated on a microplane, lemon juice, and olive oil. We'll use this glaze on our grilled lamb chops later. Watermelon pairs really well with savory ingredients, including proteins like lamb. This glaze would be delicious with chicken, fish, or even grilled vegetables. Now we'll move on to making a watermelon sofrito. To a sauté pan, add a half cup of olive oil and some finely minced shallots and poblanos. Sweat over medium-low heat. Add some toasted fennel seeds and Spanish paprika, and continue to sweat down until the mixture starts to stick to the pan. Add a pound of minced watermelon and reduce, stirring every couple of minutes until the mixture is thick. Watermelon familiarizes diners and can be an entryway to try global flavors like this sofrito. Adjust the seasoning with sherry vinegar and salt. Lastly, we'll grill the lamb chops. Preheat a grill or grill pan to high. Season each lamb chop liberally with salt and lightly coat with olive oil. Sear lamb chops until a golden brown crust is formed on all sides. Transfer to a sheet tray with a wire rack. Brush each lamb chop liberally with the watermelon glaze. Transfer to a 300-degree oven for 5 minutes or until the internal temperature of the lamb reaches 135 degrees Fahrenheit. Serve lamb chops over a bed of watermelon sofrito and polenta. Garnish with chopped parsley and mint. Your guests will love the combination of savory and smoky lamb with sweet and fruity watermelon glaze, spiced watermelon sofrito, and creamy polenta. It makes a really beautiful entree.